What's going on, guys? There's a lot going on in the One Piece card game, and I want to make sure you're up to date on all the recent news. Let's start with the meta. In the East, with the release of EBO2, we see a large shift as new players are using the green-purple Luffy leader that just came out with this set. This may be partially driven by a flavor of the month mentality to try out the newest leader, but we can't deny the success and representation that this leader has seen over the last 2 weeks. His ability allows you to return to Dawn, and then if you only have Straw Hat Pirate characters in play, you can set 2 rested Dawn back to active, and your leader gains 1000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. The finals of a recent tournament had this leader up against the new OP10 Red Green Smoker, which is a leader we haven't seen that much of, but perhaps this will change moving forward. This leader's ability works similar to Luffy's, but is easier to activate, as instead of returning to Dawn, all you need is a character with 7000 power or higher to reactivate to Dawn. And set after set, Doflamingo remains at the top, no changes here, with an 18% representation, putting him in the number 2 spot. The deck list really hasn't changed since the starter deck was released, and I think this is a case of, if it's not broken, don't fix it, as his powerful early options really are strong against most leaders. Following this list, we have a nice diverse group of leaders, with none holding more than 10%, starting with Rob Lucci, who didn't really receive anything new, but just has these strong removal options that continue to do well. Next up is Blackbeard, who was already performing pretty well and did receive some new support, most notably the 5-cost Kuzan that cannot be removed by any of your opponent's card effects, and the 6-cost Liberation, which allows you to remove a 6-cost and a 4-cost at the same time. The rest of the leaders on this list haven't seen that much of a change to their core strategies and deck lists, perhaps adding in a few new cards from OP10, but continue to perform well just like they have in the past. The last interesting thing is the drop-off of Usopp decks, as this leader was very popular throughout OP10, but again, this info is only for 2 weeks, and we might see an increase in the future. And speaking of OP10, Japan just had their nationals, where 200 of the top players competed, and this is a breakdown of the top 32 deck lists of that day. Once again, Dofi is right at the top, followed closely by Blackbeard with 7, and after that there's a pretty diverse group of leaders, including 3 Shanks, 3 Kids, 2 Purple Luffys, 2 Rob Luccis, 1 Blue-Black Usopp, 1 Black-Yellow Luffy, and finally 1 Enel. And based on this list, can you take a guess at who you think won the tournament? If you don't want any spoilers, feel free to jump ahead, as I'm going to go over that now. And if you guessed Doflamingo, you are actually wrong. It was Black-Yellow Luffy. I think this once again just highlights how many different options there are, as even though only one Black-Yellow Luffy player made it into the finals, they were able to go all the way. Coming back to the West, we see a little less diversity, as the top 5 leaders make up 85% of total decks. Once again, we have Dofi on top, followed by Black-Yellow Luffy, Blackbeard, Purple Luffy, Shanks, and then Rob Lucci as well. With then Red-Purple Luffy, Green Bonnie, Enel, and Katakuri taking up the rest. We also had back-to-back Treasure Cups on Feb 8th and Feb 15th, which gives a great overview of the meta and how well certain decks are performing. In the first cup, we still had Black-Yellow Luffy and Doflamingo tied for the number 1 spot with 9 decks each, followed by Blackbeard with 5, Purple Luffy with 4, Rob Lucci and Red-Purple Luffy with 2, and 1 Shanks. The finals came down to Blackbeard versus Black-Yellow Luffy, which is very favored in the Blackbeard matchup, and they were able to get the job done and take home the tournament. In the second tournament, we see a bit of a shake-up, with Shanks moving into the number 2 spot with 6 players making it through, and Blackbeard moving all the way down closer to the end with only 2 players. The finals came down to a Black-Yellow Luffy against a Doflamingo, and while this matchup is slightly favored for the Luffy player, the Dofi was able to turn things around and win this tournament. I also find it impressive that a leader was able to snag the 17th spot using Charlotte Katakuri, which is a leader we have not seen very often at the tournament level. So what does this all mean? Is Shanks better than we first thought? Is Blackbeard worse? And the answer isn't yes or no, but really it just depends on the tournament day of what other opponents you face. Of course, skill is a requirement, no matter what leader you choose, but if you have a really favorable or unfavorable matchups, depending on what you get matched against, it's really going to impact how you do on the day. To better understand this, TCG Matchmaking releases weekly power rankings and leader matchup stats, so you can see how well your leader is performing against others. This is also a good place to do a power ranking test of your leader, as if you're mostly in the green, that means most likely you're in an A or S tier position as you're winning against most other leaders. Starting with the most popular, if you're a Dofi player, you can see you really like to see Blackbeard, Purple Luffy, and Nami. But what you don't like to see is Enel, as you only have a 30% win rate against him. Your next question might be, well then, why isn't Enel very strong if he's beating one of the best decks out there? And the thing is, if you look at Enel's win rates, sure, they do amazing against Dofi, but against almost every other common leader, they're in the negative. This also helps to explain the differences in Shanks' representation, as since he has a lot of 50-50 matchups with common leaders, how many Shanks make it to the top 32 is really just depending on how their day goes. We can use this rationale to explain the difference in Blackbeard leaders too, as while they have great matchups into most leaders, if you face a couple of Dofis, you have a really tough time and you might not make it through. This chart can also help you learn and grow as a player, as if you're consistently losing to a leader that you should have a favorable matchup against, you might be doing something wrong and need to review your gameplay. For their weekly power rankings, they track total games played and winning percentages in order to determine their top 10 leaders for the week. I don't think this list has any surprises. Dofi's still number 1, 55.1% win rate overall, which is very impressive. Rob Lucci is right behind him. And Shanks and Purple Luffy, while having under a 50% win rate, are still very popular with 7,500 and 4,500 games played. think the most interesting leader to watch on this list is the red purple Luffy, and we'll see if this 3-life leader can take home a tournament anytime soon. And finally, for those unaware, Bandai has confirmed that at day 2 of their Card Games Fest, they're going to announce changes to the game, which we can interpret as perhaps newly banned cards, some new rules, or perhaps even seeing some cards become unbanned, which means just about everyone is talking about which cards they think will be banned. To no surprise, the number 1 leader is the number 1 target, with many players saying that the 2-cost Teach, 4-cost Trafalgar Law, and 4-cost Charlotte Pudding should all be banned. I think most non-black players also think that Gecko should have been banned a little while ago, and they still feel the same way now. Some players also feel that Gum Gum Giant is a little too strong, and to be fair, it is quite powerful, but if you take this away, I think you're going to hamstring every single purple leader out there. I also saw a decent number of people calling for the 8-cost Kid to be banned, as I guess they want all 10 of the players who still use Bonnie to just give up on the color. There also seems to be a growing sentiment between players that they believe that the Sakazuki leader is going to become unbanned. But we won't know anything for sure until March 16th. So what card do you think deserves to be on the ban list? Or do you think that no card should be? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to stay up to date on all One Piece related content.